Okay, so the last time we talked about Texas, we learned a lot. We figured out where the best places in the state are to move to and where you should not move. We also talked about the different areas in Texas and what makes Texas great and what makes Texas bad. The best places you can live in Texas are in the northern suburbs of Dallas, in places like Frisco, McKinney, and Plano, where it's really safe and where the schools are good. A lot of the suburbs on Houston's west side, cities like Sugar Land, are also great. However, all these areas are really expensive. We talked about the bad places to live in Texas too. Houston after dark is a terrible place. The border towns are really run down, but they're not too dangerous. Bellmead and Humble are also not places you'd want to move to either. Austin's the fastest growing city in this whole damn state, but there's too many people here now and too many homeless folks here too. Texas remains a top state where people are moving to right now, and with that comes a lot of drama. But there's a lot more to Texas than that. We didn't talk about some Texas history, interesting facts, and the issues that people in Texas face today. Well, that's what we're going to do in this video, kind of pick up where we left off and talk about Texas in a more lighthearted way. Plus, we're going to meet people who live in Texas, and they're going to tell us what it's like in their state and where you could move if you decided to relocate here. We got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. It's time for Corner House Tales, the divided state. Texas is the fastest growing state. There's people here from all the other places. Texas has a lot of crazy drama. Move to Texas and you'll be so hot.
For all the Texas news you need to know, I'm Skip Fritzman.
Thanks, Skip. So if you're moving to Texas, you need to know what's happening here, right? And if you live in Texas, you should probably know what's going on in your state too. Stuff like this. So we talked about how fast Texas is growing these days. More than 1,000 people move to the Lone Star State every single day. Many are conservatives looking for shelter. Lots are wealthy retirees who want warm weather. A ton are California refugees. A lot of the people who are moving to Texas are heading to the burbs. That's kind of the trend nationwide. A lot of us want the safety, the lower cost of living, and the freedoms that you can't get in big cities, especially with COVID so rampant. Look at this map. In the last decade, these are the fastest growing suburbs in America. 5 of the top 15 fastest growing burbs are here in Texas. There's just a lot of room to keep expanding in these areas, and there's big plots for giant homes, which is becoming a trend. A while ago, people were downsizing, but today, the new trend is bigger houses and giant yards, since so many people are working from home now or going out less. The cost of living is bringing people here in droves too. Texas has no income tax, though it has higher than average property taxes. Younger families seem to love it here. A recent report said that Texas is the 6th most popular place for new millennial families, mostly because of the low cost of living. And Californians are moving here in huge numbers. Last year, more than 80,000 Californians relocated to Texas in 1 year alone. Many work in the high-tech sector. That's because companies are coming here in large numbers too. Because of the high cost of living and the crummy conditions in San Francisco and LA, large tech firms are just completely uprooting and moving their operations to Texas. Nearly half of all large companies that left California have come to Texas. Many are settling here in Austin. Tesla made headlines when it left the Bay Area and set up shop in Austin. Oracle, Hewlett-Packard, Charles Schwab, and Dropbox also followed. However, while there's a lot of people coming in, there's a lot of people leaving Texas too. They call it Texit. A recent abortion law was passed, and that sent a bunch of liberals packing. In case you didn't hear, people can get a $10,000 reward for reporting illegal abortions. That's just crazy. They just loosened the gun laws here even more, and a tough border stance has ruffled even more liberal feathers. And don't forget, they just changed the state's voting rules too, which liberals say will disenfranchise poor minorities. It's almost like they're doing all this on purpose to try to run all the Dems out of the state. So what does all of this mean for the future of Texas? All these newcomers have kind of made Texas a purple state. Will the new people coming here shift the politics to the left even more? Or will Texas's new laws kind of even all that out? It's going to be interesting to see what happens here in the coming years. There's a big spotlight on this state because of the political influence it has over the rest of the country. As Texas goes politically, other states may follow. So as you can see, there is a lot of news coming out of Texas. But enough of all that. It's time for some Texas facts, people.
Why facts? Tell me where the rich people live.
If you move to Texas, you need to know some facts, right? That way you're knowledgeable about your future home. Stuff like this. So Texas likes to think it's the best in everything, but it's the second largest U.S. state and is second in population. Oh, it's still larger than any country in Europe. For perspective, just one Texas ranch called King Ranch is bigger than the whole state of Rhode Island. El Paso is actually closer to LA than it is Louisiana. Tennessee and Missouri hold the record for the most states that they border. Each touches 8 states, but Texas touches 8 states too. Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and the Mexican states of Chihuahua, Coahuila, Nuevo Leon, and Tamaulipas, or however you say that. 77% of the border of Texas is water. Texas has the greatest diversity of bird life in the United States. There's 590 native bird species here, and you can bet people shoot at just about all of them every single day. Texas says it's trying to be tough on rapes, but this state has 5,000 rape kits that it's never even processed, and that number's going up all the time. The Texas shoreline is made up of 7 barrier islands, and one of them, Padre Island, is the longest barrier island in the world. However, Texas's coast is disappearing. 2/3 of the Texas coast is going away at a rate of 6 feet per year. Some areas of the Texas coast are eroding at a rate of 30 feet per year. What? A lot of people think of desert when they think of Texas, but only 10% of the state's desert. There's swamps and forests and mountains here too. Climate-wise, most of Texas is what's called humid subtropical. Yeah, it's hot and humid here in the summer, so keep that in mind if you're thinking about moving here, fella. Texas was far away from the major battles of the Civil War, but the final battle of the Civil War was fought near Brownsville. The Confederates won this little battle, but of course, lost the war. The term "gone to Texas" originated back in the late 1800s because the state was considered a frontier territory and a haven for people looking to escape their problems, their debt, or the law. The Galveston hurricane in 1900 was by far the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history. Between 6,000 and 12,000 people died in that hurricane. Damn. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas in 1963. Everybody knows what the Texas flag looks like. It's iconic. But did you know that no one knows who designed it? It's true. 65% of Texans speak English, 29% speak Spanish, and the third most spoken language in Texas is, surprisingly, Vietnamese. It's true. A new report says Houston's the most diverse city in the country. All those newcomers, people. Everyone's heard the phrase, "don't mess with Texas," but the slogan didn't originate as a way to intimidate a-holes. It started as an anti-littering campaign. Texas isn't just a bunch of oil fields. Oil and gas are only the third biggest industry here. Banking and finance are the biggest economic industries in Texas now, hombre.
Did you know Texas is the only state that has its own power grid?
I did know that, Mappy. I also saw how that thing froze up during that bad winter they had. They gotta fix that. Now it's time for some Texas trivia, everyone. Let's call some people from Texas and ask them some tough Texas questions. This will also give you a chance to meet some people from Texas before you even move here yourself.
I think Texas trivia is stupid.
Okay, so David, you've lived in Texas for nearly 30 years now.
Yes.
And I want to ask you some Texas trivia, see if you can get some right. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. So first question is going to be, and hopefully you get this right, but you're not a native Texan, so I won't hold it against you if you don't. What year was the Battle of the Alamo?
The Battle of the Alamo, I think that was 1845, was it?
All right, so we have Jeff on a call. Jeff lives in Houston, and he's reached out to me because he wants to talk about Texas and Houston. What's going on, Jeff?
Hey, not much. Just living the dream, working, and it's been good.
All right, so I'm going to ask you 5 questions about Texas, and we'll see how many you can get right.
Okay.
Okay, question 1. You better get this one right. What year was the Battle of the Alamo?
1835.
That is so close, but I cannot give it to you. It's actually 1836.
36.
Do you know what month the Texas Rattlesnake Roundup is held in?
I saw a news story the other day about this. I'm going to say September.
Wow. I have no clue. No clue. May? I have no clue on that one.
It's not too far off. It's March.
March, okay.
I think it's like, spring's coming, so they go out and... Actually, I don't know what the Rattlesnake Roundup is. I just know that it's in March. How many European countries are bigger than Texas?
I want to say just Russia.
Bigger than Texas. Goodness, I don't think any of them are bigger than Texas.
That's right.
Yeah.
There's no European country bigger than Texas. Within 5, how many border crossings are there between Texas and Mexico?
I'll go with 15.
I want to say at least 10 border crossings. I don't know.
There's actually 29.
20? Dang, I was way off.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And that's not counting the, people climbing fences and jumping rivers.
Well,
and all that.
yeah. Then it's like 209, but
Yeah, there's a million of them out there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have 1 out of 3 right. Here's the last question, Jeff. What is the official state sport of Texas?
Football.
Oh, that has to be football. Has to be.
No, it is not football.
Dang.
Yep, it is rodeo.
Oh, man. And I came from Houston, which has the biggest rodeo in the United States.
Yeah, how'd you miss that one, David?
How did I miss that? I don't know.
There's going to be 500,000 Texans that are going to be very sad that you didn't get that right.
Yeah, they are. They are. But, man, I'm just so used to Friday Night Lights here,
And now it's time for the history of Texas in 3 minutes or less. A long time ago, before you ever thought about moving to Texas, Texas wasn't even Texas. It was all underwater. Then the water receded and the Native Americans moved in and they ran this place for thousands of years. Now we're going to go through the recent history of Texas by referring to the 6 flags. Everybody's heard of the 6 flags over Texas. That's because there have been 6 flags that have been flown over this state. The first flag to fly over this state was the Spanish flag. That's because the first Europeans to come here were the Spanish, led by this guy, Alonso Alvarez de Pineda. Then the Spanish started coming here in big numbers. This went on for a long time, and by the year 1670, there were Spanish all over the place, and they had set up a bunch of missions as a way to keep the French out. Well, that didn't work for very long. By the year 1684, the French started creeping into Texas territory, and they even managed to set up a few forts along the Gulf Coast. Then, in the year 1800, Spain had to give up all this land to France. Remember this? The Louisiana Territory? Part of that included Texas. So, for a while, the French flag flew above parts of this state. But then in 1803, we purchased Louisiana Territory from France, and all of this was ours. Part of that was Texas, but this whole part was still part of Spain. Well, that didn't last very long, because in 1821, Spain and Mexico got into a big fight, and Spain lost, so they had to retreat, and they gave all of this land to Mexico, and a lot of that was Texas. So from 1821 to 1835, this part of Texas was part of Mexico. There weren't that many people in Texas at this time, perhaps 3,500 folks, most of them Mexicans, but American settlers started moving into Texas in large numbers, and by 1834, there were 35,000 pioneers in this state. Back then, it was the opposite of what we see today. Mexico was trying to keep the U.S. out of Texas instead of today when Texas is trying to keep Mexico out. Anyways, all these new U.S. settlers in Texas started wanting to do things their way. The Texas way. I mean, the Mexican government said they couldn't own guns, and they were charging high taxes for stuff, and they wouldn't even let Texas settlers have their own religion. What? So what did they do? They got into a big fight with Mexico. For 7 months, Texans and Mexicans shot each other in 12 separate battles. At the beginning, Texans beat the Mexican armies up, but Mexico fought back pretty well. The biggest battle was the Battle of the Alamo in 1836. Here, about 200 Texans fought off a Mexican army of 1,500 for 2 weeks. Mexico eventually won, but that set the tone for the rest of the Texas Revolution. The final battle happened in April of 1836 when Mexican General Santa Anna was captured. Mexico admitted defeat soon after that. By the end of all the fighting, there were 700 dead Texans and 2,000 dead Mexicans. Legendary Texans like Sam Houston, Davy Crockett, and James Bowie all fought in this war. So in 1836, after all that fighting, Texas announced it didn't want to be part of Mexico anymore. Yeah, you think? So they declared their independence from Mexico. From 1836 to 1845, Texas ruled itself as an independent republic and made its own laws. They nicknamed Texas the Lone Star State because it was an independent republic. That Lone Star is still on the state flag today. Texas was an independent republic for 9 years. Then in 1845, after several years of discussion, Texas joined the Union as the 28th state. Yay! But then here we go again, because in 1861, the Civil War started and Texas sided with the Confederacy. But by 1870, Texas was readmitted to the Union again. Thank God. Since the Civil War ended, Texas has changed a lot. The cattle industry was a big deal back then, as was cotton and timber. Then oil was all the rage here until that peaked in the 80s. Today, Texas has become a hub for Fortune 500 companies and a lot of banking and a lot of technology. If Texas was a country, it would have the world's 10th biggest economy. Then their football team got really good in the 90s, but did a bunch of drugs, and they haven't won a Super Bowl since. And that really happened. Okay, so we learned a lot more about Texas, didn't we? The biggest question is, how will Texas change in the next decade? Will all the new people moving in change the Texas politics, or will the natives here fight to keep Texas the same way? And how will the border crisis impact this state in the next decade? And will Texas ever learn how to make Mexican food? The answer to that last question is no. Tex-Mex sucks and should only be served to Central American refugees. They can have it. Texas is the fastest growing state. There's people here from all the other places. Texas has a lot of crazy drama. Move to Texas and you'll be so hot. Hey guys, if you learned something new about America or what it's like to live in America, great. You should think about subscribing and turning on your notifications. You can also click one of these videos or playlists for more. You can also now buy my songs on iTunes and other formats. Click the link in the description. Thanks for watching. And remember, while we all might have different views, we should all be nice to each other and try to make the U.S. a better place in a positive way.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.
And are you looking to move and need advice? I do consulting. That's right. I'll sit down and talk about where the next perfect place for you and your family should be. I do it all the time. Together, let's find you a new home that's safe and checks all your boxes. You can get my email in the description to find out how I can help you find your perfect relocation. So you've lived in Texas for a while now. Texas is the pretty much fastest growing state outside of Utah. Tons of people are moving to Texas right now. How has Texas kind of changed in the last decade, would you say, living there for a while? How would you describe change that's going on there?
Oh, I've seen Texas change. I can talk about Houston and Austin. So I'll start out with Houston just because that's where I live. But Houston has gotten more congested, and of course the oil and gas industry is still big here. But there's been less and less jobs for oil and gas, and they're starting to actually switch to more tech. And Hewlett Packard is moving to Spring, just north of Houston, and Hewlett Packard Enterprise is growing, and they're in Northwest Houston. So there's a big shift towards tech jobs, Austin, I like going there a lot. And it's gotten really busy, really packed. Everything's gotten expensive, but it's a beautiful city. It's warm. It's not as humid as Houston. Great weather, lots to do, great food, and it's just been a lot of tech and medical jobs over there too. And the vibe has changed. It went from more laid back to more like California, kind of not snobby, but more like a San Francisco than an Austin from from like Stevie Ray Vaughan, Willie Nelson days.
No, that is a shame that Texas is getting California. 80,000 people moved from California to Texas last year alone.
Wow.
Yeah. Too bad for you.
More traffic. It's all right.
Yeah. There's 1,000 people a day moving to Texas.
I believe it. There's still a lot of jobs here, and there's so much opportunity. The cost of living is still cheaper compared to like California and the East Coast. But it is like home prices and stuff are rising. Eventually, some people may get priced out.
Yeah. So talk about that. The cost of living has always been average for Texas. I know there's no income tax.
Yep.
Property taxes are a little bit higher than actually significantly higher than average. I think it's top 10. But the cost of living, there's a bunch of land. Clearly, it's not like there's a problem with finding enough places to put homes in Texas, but you can only keep up with demand for so long. How is the price of homes and houses? How has that gone up in the last 10 years?
It's gone up a lot. Like the suburbs, like the Cypress area, Northwest Houston, and like Richmond, Rosenberg, Southwest. Like Houston's just expanding that way. And the other day, like I noticed the development, like homes were starting in the 180s. Now they're in like the 220s. Part of it's due to the cost of lumber increase, but there's just a lot of demand. A lot of people are putting their house on the market, and it's selling either the same day or within the week. And also, there's a lot of gentrification going on in some of Houston's neighborhoods. And, people are buying like shotgun shacks, tearing them down, and then building like a 3 or 4 story townhouse. Like $750,000. But that's happening not too far away from University of Houston and like the Midtown and Third Ward border, but not too far into the deep of Third Ward because it's pretty rough over there. And the same thing with like the Houston Heights neighborhood. That's changed a lot even since I've been here. It's been a really laid back, lots to do for people in their 20s and 30s to do. So it's changed a lot.
Where can you get a house for
$220,000? Starting like further west away from the city, close to like Houston and Cypress.
Okay, so like the western edge of the
like Houston, northwest, like northern edge, like along 290 and around there, 290 and Highway 6 area.
That's really affordable, 220. I mean that, and you're saying it used to be 180, now it's 220, but I think 220, I think even 250, people would be like, wow, that's coming from where a lot of people are coming from in the Northeast or California, like West Coast. Like that's a steal to me.
It is.
As long as it's in a decent area.
Oh yeah, they're pretty safe neighborhoods. Well, not the safest, but there's petty crime, but as far as murders, it's lower.
Mm-hmm. So in the Houston area, can you name, including the metro area, a young family's going to move, they want to live in the Houston area, where would be 3 of the best places in the Houston area to move to that are not Sugarland, that are not like $1 million homes?
Yeah. My first thought was the Woodlands area. There's a lot of good schools over there, a lot of jobs, and just take 45 down to Houston if you needed to go to something. The Cypress area also has got a lot of, good schools, and they have everything they need over there. And you can go to the city, or you can go to the hill country if you want to. And see, a lot of people are moving out towards like Clear Lake and kind of by NASA too. Clear Lake and League City. There's a lot. It's relatively safe there. Decent schools, from what I know. Close to everything, and there's good jobs at like refineries and chemical plants nearby. So that's where I would recommend for metro areas.
What about the areas to avoid in the Houston area? Where should people not go?
Definitely not Sunnyside or South Park. Third Ward is pretty rough. Northeast, and even southeast by Hobby Airport's pretty rough, and Guns Point for sure. Don't want to be along there.
So statewide, are there, if you could rattle off a few cities in Texas that you think are good places for people to go that are not Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio? Are there other communities that you would recommend people move to that necessarily like aren't in the metro area of all the big cities in Texas?
Yeah, like Fredericksburg is a pretty nice area. You get the hill country. There's things to do, and you're not too far away from San Antonio or Austin. That's definitely a good neighborhood or a good city. Sorry. For those that like hunting and fishing, the Victoria area, about 2 hours south of Houston, is pretty good. It's a city about 65,000, but you can get small town vibe, and you can get anywhere relatively close. Let's see, trying to think. There's some pretty like nice areas and cities that are outside of Houston and the other big cities too, to move to. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So politics wise, Texas is always in the news for politics for some reason or another. It's being talked about a lot because it's kind of a purple state. Which way is Texas going to go? You've got all these people moving into Texas from out of state, some of which agree with Texas politics, some of which don't. They've recently changed a lot of laws that have kind of upset a lot of Democrats in the state. Where do you see the political battle going in Texas for the next decade or so? And what do people in Texas say about how the politics are going there?
People do say that the state is becoming more liberal, partially due with people from the East and West Coast moving in. Austin is like definitely a very liberal city. Austin is like unlike any other city in Texas, both good and bad. I mean, it's very laid back, and the laid back liberal policies are nice. Your big metro areas Houston and will tend to be Democratic, but the rural areas are more Republican. It's going to be a struggle of which way things go. I don't know exactly how it's going to go, whether the Republicans or Democrats edge each other out. It's going to be pretty neck and neck. But things are getting more purple, more liberalized here.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Texas is ever going to vote for a Democratic president in the next 2 or 3 elections?
Not that soon. No, I don't see that happening.
Why is that? There's a lot of people in Texas that think that's possible. So yeah,
I say there's a lot of people. There's a lot of like people in oil and gas that are gonna more vote Republican, and want the American jobs. I think it's partially just voter turnout too. The stronger both sides feel about a issue or candidate, that they're gonna be more likely to come out. But there's still a lot of conservative pockets here in Texas, so that's why I'm like, not the next 2 or 3, but possibly after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. What about the border thing? How do people feel about all the migrants streaming in down there? It almost seemed like for a while it was an open border.
Yeah.
How do people feel about that?
Some people are for it, and because some people like that could be family or somebody they know, or so they want to see them, and they can sympathize that they want a better life and better opportunity here in the United States. And then there's people that want the borders closed and want the fence installed, and they even say like, "Oh, this would help build American jobs." And it's definitely a rough situation. There's a lot that goes on with immigration, but there's a lot of good, hardworking immigrants here in Texas, and they've overall, I think they made the community a better place and bring that culture and diversity, and I like that.
Yeah. So I have to ask you, so out of the 5 big cities in Texas, between Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, and El Paso, as a Texan, I want you to rank them best to worst.
Okay. I would go with Houston number 1, just because that's where I live, and for my background in like manufacturing, and I think it's great for me. Austin is a very close second. Then I would go San Antonio, because there's actually a lot of industry moving to San Antonio too. And then El Paso, I've been there a couple of times. And the Guadalupe Mountains are definitely a must-see if you ever get a chance. And then last would be Dallas.
Are you just saying that because there's like a Houston-Dallas rivalry or whatever?
There is, yeah. Yeah, with like the Rockets and Mavericks and Texans and Cowboys, yeah.
People in Dallas are like, okay, dude, whatever.
Right.
Yeah. What industry's moving to San Antonio? Like, what kind of stuff's moving?
I know there's some tech jobs moving. There's some tech jobs moving out that way too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always hear, so I've been to El Paso one time, passing through. I thought it was really dumpy. Good people, honestly, seriously nice people. It just looked like a shithole. Where I went, I stayed we had trouble finding a motel that was not a flea bag. We actually left in the middle of the night because the place was such a dump. Now, wow. I hear a lot of people are very, very defensive about El Paso that live there, and they say El Paso is a great place. It actually is really safe when you look at the numbers. I think it's just because it's right by the border, and border towns traditionally aren't very violent because most of the crime moves away from the border. How do you feel about El Paso? Do you think it gets a bad rap from me? Because I always harp on the fact that it's just a depressing, unsightly.
There are some dumpy neighborhoods. My brother and his family used to live in El Paso, so I saw him a couple times, and he was stationed at a military base over that way. So he lived in a good neighborhood. It was pretty safe, and things were close to him. And one day we did go hiking in the mountains, but so that was really nice. And we went through downtown. It was nothing impressive though on a Saturday night. And there's definitely some areas to avoid for sure. It wasn't like the best. The food was pretty good, but yeah, I think it's a fair assessment. It's not the most glamorous city.
I mean, and I'm not a snob. Believe me, where I grew up is not fancy. But when I go to places, I recognize. I mean, you either think it's a great place or you don't, and I just thought it was not that wonderful. But there's a lot of people there in El Paso that defend it. That are like, it's a great place to be. And I'm sure, again, hardworking, great, honest people, super cool, fun, friendly, but just the place just looks. What advice would you give people? Let's say I'm a young family looking to move to Texas from somewhere. What advice would you give? What are a few things that you would tell people to know while they're either looking to move to Texas or once they've decided to move?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say, it was the first thing I learned, that a lot of people here say, sir and ma'am, please and thank you. So like growing up in the Midwest, there was no sir or ma'am. It was actually kind of looked down upon. And I'm sure the same is on the East and West Coast. So, people are very polite. Well, most people are pretty polite and will say sir or ma'am, but definitely most people here are pretty friendly, outgoing. They're willing to look out for each other, especially when it's time for hurricanes. Unfortunately, just being in Houston, that every summer, towards the end of summer, it's hurricane season. But people are able to look out for each other, and do your homework. Do your homework. Be prepared that property taxes are going to be a little bit higher, but you get what you pay for, and keep in mind you don't have state income tax, so that's nice. The schools are pretty good, and as long as you give respect, you're going to get respect back.
Mm-hmm. Are people in Texas really that irritated by all the out-of-state people moving in? Is it just like enough's enough, or at this point there's just so many people you don't even really care anymore?
I want to say probably for the longtime residents that they don't like seeing all the new people, and maybe the older residents as well. But most younger people are, they'll meet in neighborhoods like the Midtown neighborhood or the Heights, and are like, "Oh, I'm from Chicago. Oh, I'm from Indiana," and just kind of a cool melting pot.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I've noticed about Texas in the last 30 years is that it seems to be kind of heading more towards a little bit more towards less conservatism, especially in the big cities like Austin and Houston. You see a political change there. The main vibe of Houston, you get a lot of California people coming from California, and it's the whole Keep Austin Weird thing, and it's more of a liberal type atmosphere in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I saw in Austin that kind of makes me sad, I've seen more homeless people here in Austin than I ever did in Houston. And Houston is such a much bigger city, but that was one of the first things that I noticed when I moved to Austin was just the tent cities all around downtown, and I don't know. I'm just a little bit worried about the major cities in Houston and the direction that they're going. That said, the crime just does not seem to be out of control. But they got wrapped up in that whole thing that happened last summer with George Floyd and defund the police and all that. And even now in Austin, we've been informed, the police have said, if a crime is in progress, call the police. If the crime is over with, don't call the police, call 311, which is like the non-emergency number, just to let them know what happened.
This is Houston proper you're talking about?
No, Austin now I'm talking about.
Okay, so is there a police shortage in Austin then? Is that what you're saying? Or?
Yeah, there is a police shortage because they did reduce funding for APD, and so that's why they're saying they only are going to be responding to emergency calls, like if there's a crime in progress or if it's a violent crime or something like that. If it's a property crime or something that happened before, then they're saying don't even call the emergency number. We're not going to come. Just call 311 and the non-emergency line, and basically they'll take a report and let them know.
Mm-hmm. Where would if someone's going to move to the Austin area, where would be 3 neighborhoods or parts of town or suburbs of Austin that are not crazy affordable that you think people would like moving to, like, families?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question, because one thing that Austin has had to go through is, so many people moving in, all the tech workers moving in and stuff. Austin proper, we looked at that, and the house prices are just totally out of control. And so, like, one neighborhood that a lot of people like moving into, that the prices are kind of going up, but it's still kind of affordable, is Round Rock, which is up north of Austin. That's a really nice neighborhood. There's a lot to do, great livability score. We looked at Round Rock before we were going to move in. Another place that I would definitely recommend is the area where I'm living now, is the Butte-Kyle area, which is like 15 miles south of Austin. There's just a lot to do there. It's, still within commuting distance of Austin, and just low crime and good schools and everything like that. So I definitely recommend that area for people looking for a new home. And possibly another location would be, it's a little further out, but like Cedar Park, I've heard is a really great place to live. That's up northwest of Austin. And also they've got just a lot of nice neighborhoods, good schools, low crime. So those three areas in particular. But there's a lot of good areas on the outskirts of Austin to live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
So-
think that'll be really helpful. Yeah. And, I have to ask, what would be a few bad areas of Austin where people should not move?
Bad areas, well, in particular, the what I've seen, the worst parts of Austin that I've driven around in is like the east and northeast sides of Austin, like just east of downtown or northeast of downtown, those areas. It just seems to be that's where that area is like the most rundown place, where you have all the rundown apartments. And it's sad because a lot of Austin, especially the west side, is just so nice. You got the hills, you got the expensive fancy homes, and then you get east and northeast of downtown, and it's just like all old and run down. And but that said, people are complaining because so many people are moving to Austin. Those areas are starting to get gentrified, and the people that are living there that can actually afford to live there are kind of getting moved out.
Yep, it's happening all over. I just read 80,000 people moved to Texas just from California last year.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, all the tech companies are moving out here, and they're still building new factories and new facilities out here, and it's going to continue, But there's a lot to like about Texas. I mean, between the good weather, and the good people down here, that's one thing I just want to mention, is that since I've lived in Texas, in Houston and in Austin, the people that I've run into have just been really nice. And, I know you hear about places where the people are just like nice outwardly, but here it just seems to be genuine, good people. And so I got a shout out for that. They just sort of seem to be down to earth, nice, and pretty genuine. And, like you mentioned in some of your other videos, I think a lot of the people that are coming from California they're not like bringing their liberalism with them and trying to ruin Texas. I think a lot of them that move here kind of tend to agree with what Texas stands for and want to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like there's nothing to worry about, like some of these states you mentioned that say, oh, well, you're from California, we don't want you to come here. As far as I'm concerned, if you like Texas and you think this is a great place to live, come on down. We got plenty of room, and keep coming. That brings more jobs, and we welcome you here. At least I do.
I'm curious to know, so politically, do you lean conservative? Are you liberal, moderate? You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to.
No, I don't mind mentioning it. I consider myself more of a moderate Democrat, which means that my views are not really completely in line with the Texas government the way it is. But at the same time, I respect them and, what they're trying to do. I don't really have any problem with our state government or with our local governments or anything like that. I do disagree with some of the laws that have been passed here recently, but if that's what the people of the state of Texas want, that's what they want. It doesn't really affect me one way or another. I know it does affect some people, and it's kind of sad, but
yeah. Clearly Austin is very liberal.
Yes.
Does the laws that are being passed, I mean, the loose gun laws, the abortion law, the voting bill, that's a lot of folks say is going to be, restrictive to the poor and the minorities and stuff. Do you get a sense that they're doing that to weed out the weak liberals, to try to get them to leave the state? Because I've heard a lot of people complain, especially when that abortion bill passed, They're like, we're leaving. A lot of younger millennial types or Gen Z, whatever they call themselves, said they're leaving the state because of that in particular. Do you get a sense that that's part of the motive for this, is just to kind of keep the state red?
I think that part of the motive, especially the voting laws, they're just a little worried, are these people going to come in and take over, and turn Texas blue? And it's funny because our last Democratic Texas governor, Ann Richards, I don't even remember when that was, but I guess they don't want that happening again. The Republicans have a stronghold in Texas, and they want to keep that stronghold because, we're one of the largest states in the union. And so they want that representation in Congress. They want, the Republican vote for president.